Okay, so let's just go right from that song. So we all know about Icarus, who flew too close to the sun and burned up. Okay, so I want to go in a very different direction. Because this whole song to me is about each one of us having that in us that consistently wants us to get closer to the sun, and closer to the sun, and closer to the sun, until we are not burned up, until we are one with the sun, and understanding that that's who we were all along. And there's some great lyrics in this song by Carly Simon. They need to be in danger of burning by fire. I have lived my whole life, I believe, being driven by that danger of being burned by the fire. I love that feeling. I love that feeling of being so out there that anything can happen. I love taking risks. How many people like taking risks? How many people don't like taking risks? Okay, I understand that too. That's a different talk. But I love taking risks, because without taking risks, I become kind of bland and boring. I know it's hard to believe, but that's what happens. And I think that happens for all of us when we get complacent. When we just say, oh, it's fine, everything's fine, you know, same old, same old. When I hear same old, I'm like, there's a pet peeve. I'm like, no. Same, or if someone says, how you doing? Hanging in there. I'm go, let go. Don't hang in there. Be done. So this whole song is about that thing inside of us that wants us to strive for greatness. And not to accomplish something. It's not about accomplishing. It's about striving for greatness because it's who I am. It's what I am. How many of you have had moments in your life where greatness has literally been thrust upon you? Not really, you've drawn it to you because you're equal to it. How many of you have had those moments of greatness and what that feels like? Raise your hand. All of us. We've all had those moments of greatness where it just feels like, oh my God, I could explode. I could literally burn up in this energy that I am. And yet it's indefatigable. You cannot burn up. That energy can never be burned up inside of you because you are that energy. So that's what I want to talk about today. And certainly, right in the middle of the Olympics, how many of you have been watching the Olympics? I have been loving the Olympics, the gymnastics, the diving, and we've been watching a whole lot of it. So one of the other lyrics here is, I want to be touched by the sun. So the title of my talk today is, Let It Rip. Now, Karen said it last week, you know, realizing our infinite power. Literally realizing our infinite power. Realizing our greatness. Realizing that this energy in us cannot be stopped. Even when we try to stop it, that's how so much goes wrong in our lives. Because we're trying to stop what we are, and it causes all this friction and blockage. How many of you have blockage going on? You don't have to raise your hands. I know who you are. And I know who I am. Yeah, I know. We know when the blockage shows up. But it's not because the greatness isn't there. It's not because the energy isn't there. It's because we've blocked it some way. So the title of my talk, Let It Rip. But I want to tell you where that really came from. Craig Lincoln, who's going to get up here and speak in a little bit. Craig Lincoln, who won the bronze medal in Munich for diving on the 3-meter springboard. I said millimeter to him this morning. He went, that's impossible. There were 2 M's when I read it, so I thought millimeter. So he won the bronze, and as I watch the Olympics, as I'm watching them this year, talk about greatness. Just watching Bolt run around the track. You know, just watching the synchronized divers. You ever want to talk about oneness? Watch these synchronized divers when they just do these unbelievable dives together, landing in the water. So Craig and I have been talking for years about him winning the bronze medal. And it's so funny. I thought he had won the silver. And he said to me at one point, he went, it was the bronze. And the way he said it, not that he was apologizing for the bronze, but it was what was the bronze? It wasn't the silver. And I remember somebody winning the silver once, and everybody in the room I was watching with going, aw. I was like, they won the silver. That's not an awe. Being number 2 really is number 1 because there's only one. So Craig was telling me about the idea of when they dive into the water. Now, of course, when you're watching the Olympics, all the judges are looking for no splash. You know, you should be diving into that water with hardly any splash. And if any of you watched the preliminary rounds and watched Tom Daly, go into the water with almost no splash for 6 rounds and come out on top of the preliminary rounds. It was spectacular. But what Craig told me was the reason they call that the rip is because when they dive in, for the diver, it sounds like they've just ripped a piece of material. It sounds like a rip, yes? I know you'll talk more about that. But that's why when I came up with my themes for this month, it was let it rip. Let yourself be so filled with abandon that you literally dive. And when you watch how high these divers get above the diving board, when they spring up and they're like, talk about being touched by the sun, and throwing their bodies into these flips and twirls and stuff, and then landing in such a horizontal position that there's just a rip, just vertical, just amazing. Yeah, horizontal. One of them did, as I was watching. So, what happened in Brazil is really fascinating because when the diving was starting, they were having really bad conditions, wind. And they kept talking about it. They kept talking about these divers having to deal with the conditions around them and that it was throwing a lot of people off. And so I went and found this quote by Ernest Holmes, and it's this: "The possibility of demonstrating does not depend upon environment, condition, location, personality, or opportunity." Now just listen to that list. You're demonstrating, you're getting what you want out of life does not depend on the environment you live in. It does not depend on the conditions that are going on around you. It does not depend on where you live, the location. It does not depend on your personality. And it does not depend on whether or not you have the opportunities given to you. Now just think about that. Your ability to succeed, to create. He goes on to say, it depends solely upon our belief and our acceptance and our willingness to comply with the law through which all good comes. So, as I was watching the Olympics and I was watching the breezes come and literally throw some of the divers off, it didn't throw all of the divers off. Same breeze. And one of the divers, and I can't remember his name, got up to it for an interview afterwards, and he said, and I swear to God, it was like listening to a Science of Mind lecture. He got up and he said, well, I don't allow conditions to really be part of what I'm doing. I just trust and know that as I do what I do, the conditions will support me. He said, and even if they are things that may want to throw me in a different direction, I know that there's in me the technique to adapt to it, work with it, and still land where I'm going to land. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, that's what this teaching is. That's what this is. A science that allows us to know who we are so profoundly that it doesn't matter what the conditions are. We just know who we are within the conditions. We know who we are regardless of the conditions. We know who we are and we make our landing perfectly. We let it rip no matter what. So it was so profound to watch this. It was also profound to watch the Olympic gold medalist from 2012 do his first dive, and the wind threw him, and he hit his feet on the diving board. And his first dive was not a good dive. Now, this is the Olympic gold medalist from the last Olympics. And that moment for him caused every one of his dives after that to be compromised. And he ended up in 18th place in the preliminaries. Now, the first 18 go on. So he just squeaked in. And then all the amounts are all wiped away and they start fresh. But he wasn't able to start fresh the next day because there was too much going on, too many conditions. And not the wind, because the wind's not the conditions. Whatever you think the conditions are in your life, they are not the conditions of your life. The conditions of your life are the very fact that you allow external things to create the mental conditions of your mind. And the mental conditions of your mind then take those conditions and play them out. And then you demonstrate based on those. And it's not important. Those things are not important. And I love the idea in Olympics that after they go through the preliminaries, everything's wiped clean. Start fresh. You have a chance. You can be in 18th place, which I think Budaya the time before, was in 18th place and won the gold the next time. Or Tom Daley, who was in first place after preliminary, and then the next day, when everybody expected him to win the gold, he ended up in 18th place. You know, and I haven't heard what he's had to say about that yet, but I can only imagine what must have been going on. And yet, is it about the placings? I'm standing here talking about people came in 18th in the world. There is something to really understand about all of this. Because ultimately, in the end, it's not about what position you came in, it's what position did your mind land in, regardless of the numbers. So when we're spending this month letting go and letting it rip, it is important to let it go first, because you can't rip if you haven't let go. And Reverend Jamie Klein, gave a great quote this morning in meditation, and it was this: to hold on is believing that there's only the past. Holding on is believing that there's only the past. Letting go is knowing that there's the future. So are you holding on to everything, to conditions, to things, to events, holding on to an opinion of yourself, a judgment of yourself? Or are you letting go and remembering who you are and allowing yourself to rip? Because when you do that, that's when your greatness shines forth. And this is the perfect segue for me to bring up someone who has shown such greatness, not only on the 3-meter diving board, but in class every week, where he takes that Olympian energy, puts it into his consciousness, and literally continues to challenge and question and ask. And it's that energy that is going to propel all of us in that new direction. It's that questioning mind, that willingness to say, I don't buy that. How do we make sense out of that? That's going to take this teaching and any teaching to a new dimension. So not just because of his Olympic medal status, but because of who I know him to be, please give a warm welcome to Craig Lincoln. All yours.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. I just want to share something before I even start my talk, my thoughts. And that is, it's so great to walk into this place, because this morning, you can imagine, I know I'm going to be standing up here, and I'm going to be talking, I'm going to give a little speech, a little presentation, and I'm anxious and nervous and working it over, making sure I want to get every word right and rehearsing it and practicing it and practicing it and practicing. And I walk in here, and it's like, you know what? Just come up here and let it rip. Thank you for that. My name is Craig Lincoln. I am an Olympian. In 1972, some of you remember that year, as a member of the United States team, I competed in the 20th Olympics of the modern era, and I was a bronze medalist in springboard diving. Just happen to have that with me here. And I thought this talk actually began last January, when the affirmation for the month was, I step into my greatness and let it rip. And I explained to Reverend James that word rip had the significance in diving. And so this has been percolating ever since. And he said, ooh, I want you to do a talk about that. And so with the Olympics, it's time to do that. And what I want to talk about and focus on is how this teaching, this understanding, this philosophy, this metaphorical science of mind that we use here, actually why I resonated with it so much when I first walked in here 10 years ago and heard Reverend Mellon speak from this stage. And that might be summed up by a lot of things, but one of which is the charter of the modern Olympic Games and the definition of what they call Olympism, that Olympic spirit. And you'll sense some resonance when I say the definition is a philosophy of life. Olympism is a philosophy of life that exalts and combines into one balanced whole the qualities of body, will, and mind. So I thought I might share some of the thoughts about how mind was involved in my diving. I was recruited out of high school to the University of Minnesota by a rookie, first-time, brand-new coach who sat in my parents' living room with me and told us that he believed that I could make the Olympic team and win a gold medal in 4 years. Now, you need to understand that I am, at this time, an unknown and virtually inexperienced high school diver with no experience on the 3-meter diving board. I dove on the 1 meter, but now we're talking 3 times higher and complex dives that I hadn't even dreamed of doing, and he's suggesting this. Now, I don't know at that time if my parents and I really believed him, but his sincerity and his enthusiasm were unquestionable, and so I wound up training with him. And in particular, I want to use one dive as kind of a focus. And the dive that I want to focus on in describing and tying this together is a dive that's called the 2.5 twisting reverse 1.5 somersault. We call it a gainer twister. Now, I know that sounds complicated, a 2.5 twisting reverse 1.5 somersault, but if I explain it, I think you can visualize it. In this 2.5 twister, in the gainer twister, the diver goes forward off the springboard, but then somersaults backward toward the diving board with a straight body, not once, but 1.5 times. And in the middle of that 1.5 somersault, executes not 1, not 2, but 2.5 complete pirouettes around the longitudinal axis of the body. Like an ice skater on skates, and then simultaneously stops both the twisting and the somersault vertically and drops in the water without a splash. So you can see it really is quite easy. And Coach Walker, interestingly enough, I just realized that this morning, John Walker was my coach, had a philosophy of training that he called specificity of motor learning. Specificity of motor learning, which is a PhD term for saying if you want to master an athletic skill, particularly a complex one, the best way to do that is to take that skill and repeat it over and over and over, again and again. Which sounds kind of boring, but to me I loved it because I loved the feeling of diving from the springboard. There's this incredible thrust of energy that propels you into the air. Then you got 2 seconds of complete weightless freedom to execute graceful dives or complex dives. And then there's this incredible drop and accelerating plummet to the water and a plunge through the water to the bottom of the pool. I just loved it. The problem was 2 seconds is just not enough time to bring to mind, to bring to focus all the things that need to be concentrated on. And I began to fantasize, I began to dream, I began to imagine, what would it be like to dive in slow motion? I mean, I'd seen it on TV. Wouldn't it be cool if I could float into the air and take all that time to focus my concentration right down to my toes, out to my fingertips, and all the right moves? Well, that's virtually impossible. Can't do that. But is it? I began to realize that I could do it in my mind. And so I began this practice of executing these dives in my mind. Not like watching them on a TV screen, but actually being in my body, doing the dives and executing them, and being able to do them perfectly, because if there was even a slight mistake, I could simply rewind the tape and then move forward. Now, I had a hard time convincing Coach Walker, whose specificity of motor learning means you actually do it, but we tried it in practice. I said, let's try this. I'll do the dive. Then you give me your corrective feedback, your constructive criticism, the details you want me to focus on, and I will take that into my mental headspace. And instead of repeating it on the diving board, I'll repeat it in my mind, in slow motion, doing it perfectly, and bringing into mind all your corrections. And then I'll do it again on the springboard. We'll see how that works out. Well, he agreed to that. And what we found out was, invariably, almost without exception, that third dive was better than the first one. Not as good as the one in my head, but much better than the first one. And that became part of our practice training regimen. We called it do one, think one, do one. That practice regimen carried us forward, and I began to experience success, diving meets and conference championships and national championships, leading up to Los Angeles a couple years later for the national championships, when I experienced the most unique and amazing and totally absorbing experience of my entire diving career. An experience that could only really be described as, well, spiritual. I did a perfect dive. Or maybe a perfect dive did me. I'm not really sure. Here's what happened. It's the finals of the event. It's my last dive. I'm standing on the springboard. They've announced my name, Craig Lincoln, reverse 1.5 somersaults, 2.5 twists, degree of difficulty 2.8. beep, they blow the whistle because it's an international year, and the Olympics, they use the whistle, so now they've blown the whistle. And like I've done 1,000 times before in practice, and maybe 100 times before in competitions, I'm standing on the springboard, focusing my concentration. And as I started to walk my approach, when I was ready, I began my approach. And something happened that had never happened before. It was almost as if this silence, this blanket of silence, kind of descended on me, and everything faded away. And as I stepped out of my hurdle and dropped to the tip of the board, it was as if I actually seemed to disappear. And the next thing I realized, I was on the bottom of the pool wondering what the heck has just happened. And I broke the surface. I was confused and actually afraid that something had gone horribly wrong, that I might have totally failed the dive, until I heard the scores. 7 judges, 4 of them gave me 9, 3 of them gave me 9.5. It was the highest scoring dive of the meet, the highest scoring dive of my life. I was now, for the first time, a national champion. And more importantly, I began to see what it was I was practicing for, what I was shooting for. I had a sense of what diving was really about. Now, Coach Walker, who was, up until this point, the most positive, encouraging, enthusiastic person you could imagine, telling me repeatedly, even though it wasn't sinking in, that I could win an Olympic medal, that I could be a national champion, that I could score more points, that I could beat these guys. On the way home on the plane, we're sitting next to each other. He says, "You know, you're a national champion. You know what that means?" I said, "Yeah, I know what that means. I'm the best. I am the national champion." He said, "What that means is that on Lincoln," he said, "on a given day, at a given event, with a given set of competitors and a given set of judges, you happen to score more points than the other guys. That national championship is history. I'll see you in the pool Monday afternoon. Do one, think one, do one times 3. So at that point, it became kind of a struggle to work with my coach, because I knew what I needed to do. I knew what I was working on. I had a vision, I had a focus. But he also had a vision and a focus. And it seemed the things he was trying to get me to do were not the things that I wanted to work on. And so it got to be more and more, and we had some arguments. It got to be kind of problematic, until I did what any 20-year-old national champion, male, would do when confronted with authority that contradicts what I know to be the case. I copped an attitude. And it began to really be a problem. I mean, we had some difficult times. And then I realized, okay, Lincoln, you're going to have to manage this situation. In order for you to achieve what you need to do, you're going to have to manage this guy. This coach who's helped you along has now become a problem I need to manage. And so I said, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this strategy of keeping him off my back. No matter what he tells me to do, I'm just going to do it. You know, I'm just going to do it. I got this attitude, this barely disguised chip on my shoulder, and I'm thinking, okay, he wants me to put my hands a certain way. You know what, I'll put my hands that way. Just keep him off my back. That was the whole strategy. As long as I don't get busted, I'm hoping he doesn't notice my increasingly visible, what I think visible attitude. Till a couple of weeks later, things seemed to be going okay, and he says, "Lincoln, get over here." And he calls me over, and I thought, uh-oh, busted. And he says, "I don't know what's gotten into you the last couple of weeks." And I couldn't look him in the eye. And he says, "But if you keep going the way you're going," and now I got this knot in my stomach. I think, uh-oh, this is it. He said, "I don't know what's gotten into you the last couple of weeks, but if you keep going the way you've been going, you're not only going to make the Olympic team, you're going to win a gold medal." And in that moment, it was like a switch turned. And I realized he was right. And for the first time, I really began to believe at some very simple and very deep level that it was possible. Not only possible, that it could happen. And we began to work as a really pretty well-oiled machine, the two of us. From that point forward, it was really great. And I could fast forward, we could talk about the trip, but it was like living a dream in a way. Looking back, it was kind of a dream. Leading through national championships again, collegiate championships, the Olympic trials where I won with the highest point total yet recorded in the sport, and then on to the Olympic team, and on to the Olympics, and on to the Olympic prelims and semifinals, and now it's at the Olympic finals. It's the Olympic finals. There's 3 dives left, and I'm living the dream. I'm out on the tip of the springboard. I'm the first diver in the event, and because I'm the first diver, my timing's a little off. I'm just kind of a little bit not focused. And I did what I saw more than half a dozen divers do watching the Olympics. I made a small balance error on my takeoff, fell back just a little teeny bit, and then dramatically and adrenaline fueled, overcompensated, and over-rotated the dive. I just blew a dive in the Olympics. I mean, I blew a dive. And dropped to 7th place. Heard later from the replay that the commentators on television said, oh, he's out of medal contention with that one. But you know, sometimes, I really believe, sometimes a dream slipping away is really waking up to a greater, perhaps harsher and more dramatic reality, but a very real reality. And that's exactly what happened. After that dive, I realized I've just blown a dive in the Olympic Games. This is no dream, folks. This is real. And now I'm charged up. I'm like 220 volts buzzing through me right now. I got 2 dives left. And I'm approaching them in a whole different way. It was a whole different ball game. Reverse 2.5 somersault that seemed to float upward forever. And it's like I decided when I'm coming down. And I came down, and the next thing was the bottom of the pool. And I knew before I broke the surface from the roar of the crowd that it was a really good dive. And then I stepped up for my last dive, which was the highest scoring dive of the competition, and put me on the medal stand. It was a gainer twister. So now, I've got an Olympic medal and a warm-up suit that I can trot out for special occasions. And I got some wonderful memories and great stories. And I am an Olympian. So thank you for the opportunity to present with you, and I'd like to give it back now to Coach Mellon.
I decided that I was going to just wrap this up however it came to me. I find it humorous that the thing that you sped through in your story was winning the medal. It was like, right? And it's the final, and I did my dive, and I won a medal. So anyway, but that's who you are. I get it, and you actually understand it. And what you just said about sometimes, so emotional, the dream slipping away is actually something happening, something coming. That's very powerful to hear that. Especially at this center as this building is slipping away and something new is coming. I don't know what it is, but something new is coming. But too many of us hold on to the dream. I can tell you this about Craig Lincoln. He doesn't walk this earth as I am an Olympian, and that thing that happened in 1972 is who he is today. And can we all say that? Can we all say that I am not my past? It took me a long time to stop being the Broadway actor. I mean, I know you're going to laugh, go, like, really? When was that? Did that happen last night too? Because, But the truth is, the more I keep associating with this in terms of thinking that's who I am, then the who I am now doesn't stand a chance. And that's true for all of us. So, the way I want to wrap this up today, first of all, is to just say really profoundly thank you for getting up here and sharing your story with us. I mean, it's a big deal what you did and what you accomplished. And it's interesting, too. The start of that story is someone else from the outside coming and saying, you are great. You have greatness in you. I see you going the mile. And someone saying, I didn't see it. I wasn't sure if I really believed him, but all right, I'll go the next step. Let's see what happens. And that you closed by calling me a coach. Because ultimately, that's really what I see myself as. Someone who stands here every Sunday and says to all of you, there is greatness in you. And I see it. I see it in every single one of you. I know you all fairly personally, unless you're here for the first time. But I know you all fairly personally. And I see the greatness. I know what you're capable of because I know what God is. I know who God is. And it's whoever I'm looking at from where I'm looking from. So that's really the lesson to take today, to let go of any other idea of yourself other than the truth that you have the power and the capacity to live that power. You have the capacity to realize your infinite power and then let it rip. And nothing can stop you. Nothing can hold you back. Conditions be damned. There is no condition on this planet, in this universe, that can derail you if you have a mind that says, no, this is who I am. In the face of anything, anything. There are not special occasions here. Dr. Walker used to say that all the time. I rely on principle, even on special occasions, which is the special occasions when, oh, principle doesn't work here. Yes, it does. In every single occasion, principle works. And that means what you know yourself to be, that's who you are in every situation. Craig knew himself to be an Olympian at some point. And the fact that he understood that it was a mind-body connection at such an early age, before a lot of this, I'm sure you even had heard anything of New Thought. 1972, yes, Raymond Charles Barker was at Lincoln Center giving lectures in this. And Ernest Holmes had just passed. And there was a lot of this in the world, but not a lot of people knew it. And yet, it was still permeating through to a mind in Minnesota, of all places. So that's who you are. Every single person in this room has the capacity to be an Olympian in his or her own life, to win whatever medal you choose to win. But just to be a contender, just get in there and do it. Get on that 3-meter board. And I would love to feel that feeling that he described. I got very emotional when you just go and suddenly, and I loved what he said, I decide when it's time to come down. Back to Barbara's song, Touched by the Sun. Every single one of us has the capacity to go closer and closer and closer, and more so, we have the capacity to be absorbed because it's what we are to begin with. So this month, as you keep going, really think about that affirmation. I let go and I let it rip. Let go first and then let it rip. Just like Craig, just like you, just like me. Because we are all perfectly aligned with this truth that right where I am, and so it is. Namaste.